Okay.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. It's recording now. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Pierre Morgon, for accepting this second invitation, for sharing with us your experience and your knowledge. Can I ask the first question? Can you explain for us in general what's a vaccine supply chain?
Okay, so maybe we can start with the general description, and then we can get into specificities depending on the technology. So the supply chain, of course, starts with the production part, which itself is made of two main pieces: what is called primary manufacturing, which is what gets you from the beginning of the manufacturing to the so-called drug substance, and then the secondary manufacturing, which is about formulation, filling, and finishing. And then you have all the downstream part, which is really the distribution part, which essentially means taking the product physically from the manufacturing unit all the way to the point of vaccination. And you do have differences depending on the technology that you use, which help explain, also the situation that we're in right now with the coronavirus vaccines, because depending on the technology, the nature of the challenges, hence the bottlenecks, apply either to certain technologies or to all of them. So, with that being said, let's start with the beginning. How you manufacture the active ingredient changes the nature of the raw material that you're using, and changes also your lead time between starting and delivering a product, and it changes also the conditions in which you operate. So if you take the two extremes in terms of speed, the super fast are the oligonucleotides, RNA or DNA, where essentially you operate into what is called, organic chemistry. Like you don't use use enzymes, of course, but you don't use live organisms, so you don't need a cell bank, you don't need a seed bank of viruses, and you don't need a biocontainment to avoid any leakage of potentially pathogenic material into the environment. Then you have the viral vectors, where essentially you transfect the viral vector to express the protein of the virus. There again, you don't need extreme level of containment. But then if you get to the other extreme, which is the inactivated virus vaccines, by definition, since you're working on the virus or a variant of the virus, you have to have maximum containment to avoid contaminating the environment from the manufacturing unit. So you can easily figure out that depending on the technologies that you use, and depending on the scale of production that you have at the beginning, and depending on what is called the cycle time or the manufacturing lead time, meaning how long it takes to deliver a full batch, the nature of the bottleneck is different, right? If you have to invest in capital to build a new facility or to expand, you're counting in at times in years. At least many months. If it is about fitting more equipment into an existing facility, you're talking months rather than years. If you're talking about moving from one scale of production to another scale, it might be a bit shorter. And then, of course, the conditions under which this is being done change as well. So as you can see, there's no standard answer for the primary manufacturing. Then you get to a field where almost everybody is equivalent, which is the secondary manufacturing, meaning you have your active substance, and then you have to go through formulation, filling, and finishing. Then one limiting factor for everybody is the number of vials. right now in the world, there's not enough vials, and tiny glass vials and the stoppers. They're in short supply. The manufacturers that produce those products are working 24/7, and it's a real issue. And you're looking at essentially a bottleneck for all the players there. Packaging is not so much an issue. Mind you, downstream at the level of administration, you will find a commensurate bottleneck with syringes and needles, right? You can have as much vials as you want, but you still need a syringe and needle. And if you buy the pre-filled syringes, the bottleneck is materializing, of course, at the level of the manufacturer. Then you get into, okay, what happens when the product leaves the factory? I assume that, everything is happening, by the book, that there's no quality issues, and that your batches clear quality control without any problem. And then the doses have to be moved from one or more factories to points where they will be in countries, first received in the country, cleared from the customs quarantine, and then distributed to the vaccination points. And then it is quite evident here that the more heat stable your product is, the easier your life is. Mm-hmm. So if you already have a product which is refrigerated at regular fridge temperature, it's already a constraint. You have to monitor that through the entire transportation, which can be days. When you're shipping from a factory, which could be in the US or in Europe, and you're sending a product, in Asia or in Latin America, this is not happening in one go. It's very rare. At times, it's not one flight. It could be a flight with two legs with a stopover. So, and then you have to monitor the temperature. So if it is a standard refrigerated product, it's I would say level 1 of complexity. If it's a frozen product, it's level 2. If it's a deep frozen product, it's level 3, because you run into technical difficulties for the material, the insulation material, the cool boxes, if you will, that keep the vaccine. But you also have to have the proper logistics, meaning you have to have providers that have the technology to ship your product under those conditions. And of course, the more you ask for something which is rare, the harder it gets, right? And this explains mechanically the bottleneck that we're experiencing today. And then you have what happens in the so-called last mile, okay? When you arrive in the country and then you have to take the vaccine to the people. Now, if you have a vaccine which is standard fridge temperature, possibly with a few hours or a few days, a few weeks of stability at room temperature, you're into pretty much the configuration of the vaccines that are used in the standard program of immunization in the country. So what you can do is you can piggyback on the infrastructure that exists for the program of immunization and largely use your primary care infrastructure. So there's not so much bottleneck there, except into the very poor country where infrastructure is a problem and where even supply of electricity is a problem as well. But the minute you get to freezers or deep freezers, it's not that you can't necessarily find them, although the deep freezers are not in huge supply, but they don't exist in many facilities. If you typically, when you do vaccination, you distribute the product all the way to the pharmacies or to medical practices or medical houses. They have fridges, regular fridges. When they have a freezer, it's a tiny compartment. You can't store tons of doses in there, and they don't have a deep freezer. So the other consequence of the cold chain requirements is that if you have a standard vaccine that is refrigerated between 2 and 8 centigrade, you can still follow the same route as usual and take the vaccine to the people. If you have a vaccine that has major constraints and can be kept at fridge temperature only a few days, it is too challenging to take the flow of the product all the way to the people. So you just reverse the flow. You keep the vaccine in a few locations and you bring people to those locations. So it means you have to create a specific logistic. Right?
Yeah.
So the way from the It matters a lot because from the what is called the programmatic perspective, the way you execute immunization campaigns, you essentially have two very different types of execution, even in very developed countries. I mean, countries like Switzerland, which can hardly be qualified as an emerging country, the infrastructure is not there everywhere to immunize easily with those frozen vaccines.
Sure.
So if it is a challenge for countries like, countries in Europe or even countries in the US, I mean, look at the situation in the US, you can imagine what it is in a middle income country. It becomes extremely difficult, except maybe the capital city or a few main metros. But you need to be able to reach out to the population into the remote areas, possibly to rural areas. So again, the nature of the supply chain, the fact that there is, the need to refrigerate the product throughout, the stability that it has to be exposed to, let's say standard temperature for some time, drives the nature of the infrastructure that you have to put in place, and therefore determine the bottlenecks that you meet all the way through, from manufacturing with capacity in the cold chain, capacity in transportation, amount of packaging material, primary packaging material, meaning vials or syringes, and availability in the end of healthcare providers to immunize the people, because mind you, not everybody knows how to make an intramuscular injection.
Sure.
So all along the entire chain, you do have, not obstacles, but bottlenecks that contribute to, restrict the flow and therefore to limit the ability to roll out easily. The easiest vaccine would be a vaccine that would be a tablet, one tablet that you pop up, or a nasal spray. I mean, something that even anybody could administer. You don't even need a nurse for that.
Or powder.
Or powder. I mean, something that would be, more akin to a standard medication, so to say.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think that if I'm not sure, there's a Swedish company that's working to transform the COVID vaccine into powder. Their technique is dry. They work on dry vaccines, and I wanted to interview the CEO of this company, but he refused to talk about their technology and what they're going to do. So it will be interesting to work about it. How to transform
It depends on which vaccine they're drying and why they're drying it. I mean, drying vaccines is a well-known technology. It is called freeze drying. So essentially, you freeze the material and then you modify the pressure so that essentially the ice sort of evaporates into vapor, and you dry the product. And freeze drying has been used, and it's a complex and expensive technology. There are attempts to use another technology called spray drying, where you essentially use a nozzle that actually sort of creates an aerosol with the solution, and then the droplets fall into a column where you got air, typically heated air, and then you get a powder which falls at the bottom. But this is applicable only to substances that are resistant to heat.
Okay.
So I mean, I don't know this Swedish company because you didn't name it, and I don't. So I don't know.
I will find the name. I will write you again in an email. Yeah.
So I don't know what they're working on. And most of the time, the reason why you dry a vaccine is because it is unstable in liquid form. Because essentially, water is triggering, in spite of all the buffers and the stabilizer of the formulation, could actually trigger some either polymerization, depolymerization, whatever. I mean, some kind of transformation. The drying actually stabilizes the formulation. But typically, this would be a bottleneck because it adds an extra manufacturing step. And typically, you do it if you do freeze drying, you fill the liquid into the vial, the tiny vials, and then you put the vials on trays that go into a freeze dryer. It looks like a gigantic it's a hybrid between an oven and a fridge, essentially, and where you can modify temperature and pressure inside. And then when it's dry, you get the vials out, and you have to put the vials back into your machine to put the stopper on. So it's a complex operation.
Okay, thank you very much, Pierre. You just answered my first and second question, what are the potential problems and bottlenecks. So when I was listening to what you explained, I had other question. I heard that Moderna and Pfizer are working, even the CEO of BioNTech has said that we are working to solve this problem of, temperature for keeping, because it is a very low temperature that's required for keeping the
minus 70, I think. Yes.
Yeah, they are solving it, so it will be -8 or something that that even the doctors, general.
No, -8 you don't find into doctor's office. What you want to get is the temperature of a fridge, meaning +2 to +8.
Okay.
That almost all the pediatric vaccines and most of the refrigerated medications, monoclonal antibodies, etc., are kept at that fridge temperature, between +2 and +8. The minute you're below 0, it becomes complex.
Okay, so I don't know how much exactly, but they're trying to solve this problem for the second generation of a COVID vaccine.
Yeah, I think they're probably working on a more stable formulation. See, the issue with RNA is a very unstable molecule. Even at natural stage, it is a molecule that doesn't have a long half-life, and it gets degraded very fast. And there are several attempts. There are companies working on a circular RNA. There are companies that are working on different tricks to actually increase the what is called the half-life, the longevity, if you will, of the RNA when injected into the body.
Okay, so I also read that several companies that are already working on second generation of the COVID vaccine in order to make it, efficient for the variants, different mutation of the virus. So when do you think that they will come to the market, this second generation?
Well, realistically, I think they will be getting into the clinical phase into the coming weeks or months, and we should have them towards the end of the year.
Okay, so we need a long time for the next generation.
Well, in principle, it's going to be faster because now the technology is known. There's already evidence that there's clinical efficacy with those vaccines. So it is essentially a repeat and paste, if you will, of the not really copy, because of course there's a difference, but there's the benefits of the knowledge accumulated in the first phase of the first generation vaccine. But I think the real question here is maybe less the technical difficulty, because the technical hurdles, be it for the oligonucleotides, for the viral vectors, or even for the various protein expression system, each of these systems is now yielding, credible, vaccines. Even the good old technology of inactivated viruses is providing decent protection. So the real question is the choice of the variant. Now, you get into a situation which is not very dissimilar to what we observe with influenza. Is when do you make a decision?
Yeah.
And which is the target variant? Because you have to make an assumption today about what will be the profile of the epidemiology 6 months, 9 months down the road. This is I'm using 9 months deliberately because this is the time frame between the WHO recommendation on the variant and the time when you start immunizing in a campaign. So the reality is it is difficult because you actually use models of circulation and you assume that a variant will dominate. Now, the solution for influenza, as you know, is not a single valent vaccine. It's a 4-valent vaccine. We have 2 A strains and 2 B strains, right? So now it's a quadrivalent vaccine, which is used for influenza. So will we evolve towards a coronavirus vaccine, which will be multivalent? I don't know. It's possible. At least you cannot rule out this possibility today.
Okay, so there are still many things that we do not know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, okay. So I jump into my third question. How COVID vaccine supply chain can be optimized in EU? Do you have any recommendations?
Well, I think if the Europeans were not negotiating like idiots, they would start by optimizing the number of doses that arrive their way. The second thing is if they were opting for more efficient delivery systems or models. You know, when you look at, I think the latest numbers is that UK sits at what, 15, 18% of its population covered?
It's more than 20, I think.
It's more than 20 now. France is at what, 2%, 3%?
Near 3, I think.
Okay, so essentially you've got an 8 to 10-fold advantage to the UK compared to France. It's about the same population. It's about the same degree of maturity of the economy. What kind of lessons can you draw? Which is more efficient?
But they have had their own vaccines, you know.
This is the most pathetic excuse that the politicians would use to try to protect their, I'm going to say something vulgar, so I'm not saying, to protect their rear end from the wrath of the people.
Okay.
The reality is that even when you have doses in France, they're unable to use them properly.
Yeah.
So there are several things that come into play. First is how you negotiate to make sure that you secure the supply. Okay? And the best way to secure the supply is to negotiate, which is, by the way, what the middle-income countries have all been doing, is they've negotiated with all the suppliers instead of making choices a priori. You know, do you know what is the coverage rate in Chile right now?
No.
16% at the last count. Chile.
Yeah.
Okay. And they can look down at France and say, haha, the French, you know, who like to teach lessons to people. Well, I mean, the Chileans have been beating them hands down.
Yeah.
Why? They've been negotiating with everybody, with Pfizer, with Moderna, with AstraZeneca, and with the 3 Chinese companies. And they get vaccines from everybody.
Oh, yeah.
And therefore, their point is, as soon as you have a vaccine which has proven that it is medically effective and that it is safe, we use one or the other. Then, of course, you can have policy decisions to decide to reserve a specific vaccines for a specific age group. That's for sure. But the point is, they have been hedging their bets by negotiating with everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's point number one. It's how you negotiate. Okay. And typically, when you're a public health authority, you should not make a decision a priori. I want this one because it's American, or I want this one because it's Chinese. This is the wrong criteria. The criteria is it working or not medically?
Scientific.
And then the origin doesn't matter at all. As soon as the quality is ensured. So the point here is first how you negotiate. You have to imagine it's a race, okay? And at the beginning of the race, you got a horse, a donkey, an elephant, a dog, a rabbit, whatever. You want more than one animal on the finish line because you don't want to depend on only one supplier. And this is the principle of advanced negotiations.
Yeah.
So let's leave it there. So first one is that part. The second thing is, when the doses arrive, is to have a clearer policy and to make sure that you empty the fridges, right? You need to get the doses out. A dose that sits in a fridge is useless from the public health perspective. You may have it, you may own it, but it doesn't bring you any benefit in terms of blocking the circulation of the virus, unless it is injected.
Yeah.
And I think the third thing linked to this is to make sure that you ensure a smooth flow of people to the points of vaccination, right? So why do you think that some, middle income countries have been organizing drive-ins? You drive with your car, you pull up your sleeve, a nurse is there, injects, and off you go. Although it is not necessarily a good idea, because in principle, you're supposed to sit down for 15, 20 minutes to make sure you don't have any allergic reaction. But they're doing this to accelerate and speed up the access. So again, it's borderline in terms of safety, but it is efficient. And so that's the execution part, right? But then there's also the motivation part. There's the pull mechanism. How do you bring people in there? And in countries where you have a very high level of vaccine skepticism, hesitancy, it is difficult, because triggering positive action on someone who's an antagonist is close to impossible, but on someone who's vacillating, it's not easy. And you look at the countries that have been very successful. Look at Iceland. Iceland is a perfect case in point. Since the beginning of the epidemic, there was joint communication between the medical community and the politicians. And they were speaking with one voice. Arguably, people say, oh, it's easy, there are only 300 or 400,000. No, it's a matter of political will.
Sure.
And in this respect, the Germans have been better than the French. But I think lately, I think it may be less evident. But all the countries where there was this cacophony, inconsistent messaging, confusing messaging, and when the level of trust that the people place in the government, in the authorities, goes down, the odds of people willing to go and immunize diminish as well.
Yeah, but in Europe, I think, and in the rest of the world nowadays, they are talking about the passport, the vaccine passport, health passport. You have heard it probably in Israel. Yes. They are using it, the code bar that you have to show when you want to go to do sport, when you want to go to theater, everywhere. And tomorrow, if you want to travel, you have to have, your code bar. So that you are vaccinated or you are COVID-free. I think that everywhere it will be, it will become a must. So this can also motivate, or push people to get vaccinated.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've seen a few comments I consider stupid on the social networks about people that are against this notion of a vaccine passport. Now, these people tend to forget that if you want to go to some countries in Africa or in Latin America, you need to have yellow fever. And if you do not have the vaccination certificate, you don't get in the plane, right? Yeah. It's not even a matter of landing there. You don't even get in the plane, right? So this is not new, except that this time around, it has such a global reach that's, in the case of yellow fever, people would say, well, I'm not going to countries where there's yellow fever, and I can still go on vacation. But let me put it this way. I mean, you're a country like Greece, like Italy, or like Spain, and you depend on tourism to get your economy back on track. Well, I am telling you, if I'm the Greek, the Italian, or the Spanish authorities, I impose the passport. And I think it's a great idea. And besides, I, as a citizen, don't want to be next to someone who's not immunized and who might actually be carrying the bug. Now, typically what those idiots are saying is, but if you are immunized and I am not, you have nothing to be afraid of. Well, this is not entirely true. Number one, because not every vaccine is 100% effective. Number two, we still have no information about carriage. So they may actually pass the bug on to me, and I may inadvertently carrying it with me, even if I don't develop a clinical case. So anyway, I think personally, I am in favor of curbing liberties of the people who do not immunize.
Yes, but Pierre, they say that there will be a lot of a black market, for producing, for fake tests or for fake passports. I heard that before Christmas they were selling the test, the negative test for even 300 euros. pounds or something like that for the travelers. So it is awful. Can you?
But I mean, by definition, the minute there is something which is legalized and compulsory, you have a black market which is created. You may recall the old black and white movies when cigarettes were taxed in some countries and not in others. People were going to the next country to buy cigarettes without the tax. It was the same for alcohol. Remember the prohibition, the Volstead Act in the U.S. So it's inevitable. The question is, which technical means do you use to recognize a fake from the real thing? But nowadays with RFID, holograms and stuff, I mean, we've got the technical means to beat the and remember that the people who are actually selling those things, they're not like the sophisticated counterfeiter that get into fake money or stuff. They're probably not very sophisticated crooks. So they will not have the technical means to beat the legal ones.
Yes. Yeah, and there is, while you were speaking again, I was thinking about the subject of black market for vaccines, the fake vaccines, like fake medications,
Well, this is already surfacing in a number of countries.
Yeah, it is very dangerous. It is really dangerous. And I hope that, there are enough possibility to fight against it, I think.
Well, honestly, the only possibilities that exist, they exist in countries where there's a very good control throughout the supply chain, essentially from the manufacturers all the way to the end users. And typically where the systems fail, it's at the end, at the terminal part. Because typically a manufacturer knows what it manufactures. When you have big pallets that go to an airport, and this is under the the management of big airlines or big freight companies, there's not much that can happen. Typically, the fakes surface at the market level in the countries through parallel routes. Mind you, there's a guy who's been arrested in China for producing fake vaccines in China, which was saline, essentially, saline for injection. At least it was not something toxic or anything. And he was selling it. I think when the guy was arrested, he had already made something like the equivalent of like $3 million of income with pure water, almost pure water. It's water with a bit of salt. So I think, again, to me, it's inevitable that this will happen. Mind you, it did happen during the H1N1 pandemic. So it's not new. It's just surfacing again. And besides, the question of counterfeit medicine exists even in the inter-pandemic period.
Sure.
Right? Especially in countries like Africa. It's quite common. So, and again, everybody knows how to control this. You control this through the use of RFID and a good set of technology, IT infrastructure to actually track, to have the good data monitoring system to track where your doses are going.
Yeah, that's it. So for the last question, what can you say about how supply chain of an organization can fit into their business model?
Well, it depends. It depends which company. Typically, vaccine companies, they do not verticalize. So they manufacture the minute the vaccine leaves their cold chambers. They still assume pharmaceutical responsibility, of course, but then it's another professional entity that handles distribution and logistics. And there are several reasons for this. The first one is that all the distribution part is extremely capital intensive. I mean, you need a fleet of planes, trucks, whatever. I mean, they say fridges on wings, with wings, or fridges with wheels, but that's what it is. And the second thing is the margins in the distribution industry are much lower than they are in the pharma, biotech, and vaccine industry. And typically, if you were verticalizing, it would cost you a fortune and you would downgrade your financial ratios. So you simply don't do it.
Okay, okay. Just can you recall us your book that's about the marketing vaccines, the book that
It's actually not a book, it's a publication. It's a publication which I authored with a professor at INSEAD,
Mhm.
and his name is Reinhard Engelmar. And this publication is now 9 years old. It was 2012, but it's still very current. It is available on the Social Science Research Network. You can get this online, and I have a large number of readers these days. I think it's been topping something like 7,000 or 8,000 readers recently.
Oh, wonderful. Don't you have any new project for writing something about the COVID vaccine?
No, actually, I've been invited recently to deliver a presentation at a webinar for healthcare people around the world, and we've been overwhelmed by the
Great.
request for the presentation, and I received plenty of feedback on the social network on this one. So. Yeah, well, I mean, the subject is hot, so it's not difficult to attract attention when you speak on such a subject nowadays.
Okay, thank you very much. I just cut the registration recording and
Recording.
okay, thank you very much.